First I'm going to just go over today's agenda. Anyone paying attention to the economy and industry news knows that the retail sector as we know it is under great pressure. And that's why we have this webinar going today. All we hear about in the news is the impending retail apocalypse, e-commerce, omni-channel, and the rise of mobile-driven shopping. But what if I told you that brick-and-mortar sales still represents 85% of every dollar spent in retail today? I bet you'd be surprised, right? So e-commerce is growing every year, but Goldman Sachs just released an estimate that even if it grew at a rate of 15% annually, 70% of sales will still be made in stores 5 years from now. So our industry might be transforming immensely, but brick and mortar locations are going to remain essential, and the need to manage those physical stores and buildings efficiently is not going away anytime soon. In fact, we believe that it's actually more important than ever to efficiently manage your buildings. And because of that, companies need to make adjustments in their operations to effectively deal with this reality and stay competitive in the new landscape of retail. So in that vein, our agenda today is going to be about where the industry is today in terms of retail facilities operations. We're going to touch on the landscape in 2017, and we'll talk about a few examples of how traditional companies are operating within this disconnected ecosystem of information. Then we're going to go through a case study of how an innovator in retail is using smart connected facilities technology to streamline their operations, reduce their overhead costs, and enhance the way their brand is being received by the public. And then lastly, we'll talk about what the process of getting started down the path of a smart connected retail portfolio can look like. And Aaron is going to talk a little bit about how you can take advantage of this type of technology today, and he'll go through some real world ROI examples. So first, let's talk a little bit about what this technology is before we actually dive into those specific use cases. So how many of you are familiar with energy management systems? You can go ahead and use the raised hands function in the software here on the upper left corner of your screen. I'll give everyone a second to respond here. Great. Looks like most of you are familiar with the technology here. So energy management systems have really evolved over the last few decades to help provide more data about how buildings and equipment are operating from an energy perspective. Typically, these systems are able to tell users when their building's energy consumption is trending out of normal, when it's too high, but they can only tell you that on a building by building basis, and they simply focus on energy usage. This usually won't be able to tell you why something is broken in your facility, what the reasoning is behind that issue, and how you can take efficient and proactive actions to fix it. So sometimes this is a site level issue, and sometimes it's a systematic portfolio-wide issue. And in the latter case, companies need to be looking at information beyond energy use across the portfolio to drive corrective action and lasting results. And that's really where smart connected facilities platforms come in. So what we're going to be talking about today is integrating real-time sensor data from more than energy consuming systems like mechanical systems, metering devices, controls, utilities, work order systems, vendor work history, and even Internet of Things sensors. You can layer advanced analytics such as fault detection and diagnostics over all of those data sets and be notified directly about existing and potential problems in your stores. So this technology also equips you with the information your team needs to find and repair those issues before they become expensive problems or before occupants complain about discomfort in the buildings. And we at Switch really believe that this is the future of multi-site facilities management. So that's really where Switch Automation, your host today, comes into the picture. Switch is a smart connected facilities platform, just as Aaron mentioned. The platform enables retail portfolio managers to leverage data and analytics to optimize the performance of their stores and buildings. The software helps facilities managers execute their energy management strategies today while laying the foundations to take advantage of those Internet of Things sensors coming down the pike in the next few years. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see a few statistics that highlight how Switch has really impacted operating costs in the multi-site facility space. And as I mentioned, Aaron will be talking a bit more about this as he wraps up today's session on the back end of this webinar. The Switch platform has helped customers identify and capitalize on opportunities to reduce energy consumption in their stores by an average of 15%. And it's also enabled teams to avoid expensive maintenance visits and gain a better holistic picture of how their portfolio is operating. So typically, customers of Switch see a payback period of 18 months or less. So today, there's a significant business intelligence gap that a typical multi-site retail portfolio manager deals with every day. In today's retail operations landscape, there's no lack of data. One of our friends at Starbucks actually got back from the Better Buildings Summit a few months ago and told us that everyone has a big data issue. The only problem there is that there's a lack of meaning that's being extracted from that data. In fact, most retail operations teams complain about having too much information and not enough tools to make sense of it all. So as a result, we see a lot of inefficiencies. Energy Star estimates that typical retail buildings waste over $13,000 in energy annually. And the root cause of inefficiencies like these lie in the way that real estate operational data has been historically collected, analyzed, and actioned. Our research and experience at Switch shows that portfolio operators struggle with a disconnected ecosystem of portfolio information. Typically, a facilities team or an energy manager will have to manually collect utility data from files and spreadsheets that are dispersed across their organization. They'll compile it and analyze it on a site-by-site basis, and this process takes a long time to complete. And the information that they need is changing every day, so they have to keep going back and completing this process. If a portfolio level analysis is required, forget about it. It's usually performed manually in an Excel spreadsheet and can take weeks. We've heard stories of energy managers spending 1 or 2 weeks collecting utility bills and EMS data from their stores, then compiling it into 100 megabyte spreadsheets, only to have those files crash and delete due to size and complexity. In general, what we're seeing here is a limited continuity around the way facilities data is collected from across organizations. And what this leads to is a lack in visibility into how their portfolio is operating and what needs to be done to make improvements to their portfolios. So another example is a facilities team we were working with. They were spending capital improvement budget on carpet replacements in their stores instead of HVAC upgrades because they weren't able to efficiently collect and look at their energy data against historical work order data on those pieces of equipment. The result that we're seeing here is a fragmented data set, a lack of performance visibility, and a reactive operational model that's quickly draining facilities budgets in the form of excess maintenance, high energy consumption, and premature equipment failure. So now that we've laid that foundation about the disconnected landscape in facilities operations, I want to illustrate this reactive operational model that we're seeing with a few real examples from a major retailer that was experiencing these problems before implementing a technology. So this Fortune 500 retailer was operating over 1,000 locations spread all across the United States. And before they implemented a connected facility software, they were operating without a centralized hub to look at all the information about their equipment, their energy use, capital expenditures, work orders, and even building occupancy from their sites. The company also lacked a centralized system to remotely control their HVAC and lighting equipment. So they were making all controls adjustments in person on a store-by-store basis. So this retailer had over 70 locations bundled up into the southeastern United States. And they had been starting cooling schedules 2 hours before their stores were open for business. And the schedules were in place to cool down their sales floors before customers came in to shop. They made these scheduling changes as a reaction to customer and employee complaints about hot space temps in the morning. And they had no way to efficiently monitor the effectiveness of those changes at scale. So this was adding 25% to the actual 8-hour operational day. And these stores were consuming way more energy than necessary. And these schedules were overworking and shortening the lifespan of their HVAC equipment. And across the country, the retailer was routing all their occupant discomfort calls to their centralized service dispatch center. The dispatch center had no way of knowing whether or not a service call was qualified because they lacked remote visibility into space temperatures and HVAC air supply temps. And as a result, the call center was sending a technician to site every time a hot or cold call was made at all their locations. They were spending at least $250 per maintenance visit. And we calculated that 40% of the time, there's actually nothing wrong with any equipment or space temps. And those technician visits turned into truck rolls. They were just useless. So if a piece of equipment was in fact broken, that maintenance tech would have to return to the store at a later time after their initial visit with the appropriate replacement part. So this doubled the cost of this issue to at least $500 plus part costs. So this is a classic scenario where the blind are leading the blind. Nobody has information. And this can be prevented at scale with remote access to monitor and control those HVAC systems, then make a preventative response to those occupant discomfort calls. Now, in addition to these issues, the retail landscape was quickly evolving and competition was becoming fierce in this retailer subcategory. So their senior leadership had made brand loyalty and customer retention a top priority. Although they were placing a high value on their brand image there, it was difficult for the stores to actually abide by this new corporate policy. So when key storefront signage was failing in high foot traffic areas or in key shopping malls, after the sun went down, their regional FMs had no way of knowing that the signage was out, short of visiting each location in person, which at the scale of 1,000 stores is next to impossible. Key holders were already leaving for the night and nobody was around to identify the issue that the signage was broken and then submit a service request to the call center. So as a result, the facilities team wasn't notified about that broken signage until 2 weeks after the ballasts blew out. And this negatively affected their brand image and could have been prevented with a simple automated alert. So as you can see here with these examples, and probably with your own experience, there are a lot of costly mechanical and operational problems happening in retail stores every single day. And these issues can be prevented with a combination of the right information, the right process, and the right technology. So we know that the need for physical retail spaces is not going away anytime soon. So we want to talk about what retail operations leaders can do to proactively avoid events like these that negatively impact their brand and their budgets. And you'll see here that RILA, the Retail Industry Leaders Association, has just opened a tech center for innovation with Accenture to support the notion that business as usual can no longer support success in this fiercely competitive environment. So I think we're all pretty aware that retailers must adopt technology to gain and maintain a competitive advantage in the market today. So luckily over the last several years, there's been a lot of innovation in the technology space. Switch automation here is based right in the heart of Silicon Valley. The capabilities of these technologies that support facilities groups have just increased dramatically in recent years. And what we've seen is more cost-effective EMS systems, longer-lasting LED lights, newer and cheaper solar solutions. And we're finally seeing a convergence of IoT sensors like indoor air quality monitors and occupancy sensing devices that are producing really important and valuable information about the relationship between your physical stores and the people inside of them. So what connected facilities platforms are doing are integrating the data from this vast landscape of sources to provide portfolio operators like you with the visibility and insights that you need to take a proactive approach to facilities management. So with these platforms, we can unlock new value by moving into a data-driven problem-solving model. And now we can answer questions like, which are my best and worst performing stores from an energy perspective? Which makes and models of my equipment are consuming the most energy? And how can I use this data to optimize my newer build stores? We can find out, why have there been so many work orders issued to solve the same problem in the same store within a month? What's going on here? What's the root cause of the issue? And how can I prevent this from happening again? And how can I hold my vendors accountable with data? There's other retailers that are questioning why the lights are on all night in my stores when I have schedules in place. Did someone go in and override those schedules? Or why are the parking lot lights not on all night outside of my stores? These are all questions that can be answered, but today's retail operators generally lack the technology in the field, and this is costing organizations millions of dollars every year. So let's go back and discuss that national retailer that we touched on a little bit earlier. They realized that their OpEx budgets were bleeding out year in and year out, and they needed a systematic way to take advantage of all the data that their stores were producing every day. They needed to learn from it and move into more of a proactive approach to facilities management, like the approach we've been talking about. So the retailer implemented a connected facilities platform to help them make that transition. So if you remember that cooling schedule that they were running, the one that I mentioned just before, the platform that they integrated was able to remotely connect their HVAC systems with their utility bill management system, with their occupancy counters, and then layer analytics over the data from all those sources. And as a result, they were able to identify that in order to reach a comfortable space temperature set point before the stores opened, the retailer only had to start running their air conditioning 30 minutes before opening. So that's much less than the 2 hours that they previously thought without that backup data coming from their systems. So once they realized that, they used the platform's system control feature to change the cooling schedules and set points across all the affected locations from their laptops in the office. And with this centralized and analytics capability and remote control, the retailer is able to cut their cooling schedules by an hour and a half across all of those sites. So that made a huge difference. And as a result, they saw an average of a 15% reduction in energy use on their utility bills for that whole region in just under 3 months. And what's more is that they didn't even have to deploy a technician to any of those sites to make those adjustments. And at scale, this change paid for the software investment in one fell swoop. So you can see how quickly these adjustments can provide payback. So the retailer was also able to significantly reduce the amount of service technicians they're paying for to respond to discomfort calls. Their call center now routes all their hot and cold calls over 1,000 stores through their connected facilities platform and engineering services group. Since all their stores' HVAC equipment is now sending real-time data directly to their cloud-based platform, users can now check in to see if space temps are being met and if supply air temps are at desired levels in the zone in question. They can go in and investigate if a piece of equipment like a compressor or an air handling unit isn't functioning properly and why it isn't functioning properly. So again, it's a key differentiator between energy management systems and connected facilities platforms. So over 40% of the time, they're finding that nothing is wrong with any of the mechanical equipment and a maintenance visit is avoided. This has saved the retailer $250 per store per month across their entire portfolio. And that's resulted in over $3 million in avoided expenses annually. It's a huge number. If there is, in fact, a mechanical issue in those stores, the platform users can leverage multi-conditional logic rules called fault detection and diagnostics to find the root cause of the problem Or in other words, which piece of equipment is actually causing the occupant to make that discomfort call. So if a piece of equipment is failing or operating incorrectly, the platform users can now equip the technician with information about the exact piece of equipment that requires service. And that supports an efficient repair or replacement in a single site visit instead of having to come back with the right piece of equipment. So companies that aren't using a software to support this type of proactive maintenance model are often sending their technicians to site to blindly investigate problems. They spend several hours poking around equipment only to find the root cause of the issue, then schedule another time a week later to come back with the replacement part once it's been delivered. So that's doubling the cost of a service visit, and it takes time away that can better be spent elsewhere. It also prolongs occupant discomfort in the stores and can negatively affect sales. So I'll touch on this example quickly, but I mentioned that the company we're discussing is placing a high value on brand image. They're now able to monitor their signage down to the circuit that each sign is connected to. So if and when a fixture or a ballast is failing or electricity being provided to the fixture ceases, the platform is now going to send an automated smart alert to the regional FM, and it'll automatically generate a work order to replace that part. And we recently saw this model in action when an alert was triggered at 9 p.m. one evening last week. A tech was on site to make the repair the following morning with the right piece of equipment. So signage failures and affected brand image are now a problem of the past for this retailer. So what we're seeing here is that for many companies, the problem is actually mapping out the route to become a data-driven business and actually knowing where to start to go down this path. I don't think it's a question of whether or not to invest in digitally enabling processes or in applying technology to improve the customer experience. I think we believe that the areas of investment are absolutely critical for success in retail, and the investments that companies make in these places will help one another. So now that we've illustrated some of the use cases here, we want to take a minute to hear what the audience is interested in. And we can go ahead and look at a few pieces of focus that a lot of our audience is wanting to achieve here. So a lot of people are interested in streamlining operations and driving sales revenue. And enhanced sales in retail stores can be linked to how well buildings and stores are operating. Aaron, maybe you can touch on how the audience can use smart buildings technology to drive these kinds of results.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Aaron, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a little bit about how this type of technology is implemented, and then we can help them get started down the path to digital transformation and what some ROI numbers might look like.
Sure, absolutely. And a question just came up, but I think because I'm going to hit a couple slides here, maybe I will wait for the Q&A here in about 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll be sure to address that one that just popped up. So thanks for that. Let's talk a little bit about the practical side of getting started on all this. So, we've got a team in-house at Switch that has a lot of experience deploying this type of program. And the cornerstone of any good program for connected buildings, particularly in a multi-site situation, is depending on who you're talking to, in getting started with this, oftentimes they're going to focus on the portfolio data or the real-time building integration. In particular, these days, there's a lot of attention on the real-time building integration. And while that is incredibly important, it's important not to lose sight of both of these. So our customers often come to us, just as an example, looking for one or the other of these, and we always try to encourage to think about both. The reason why it's important, even if what you're wanting to do is say integrate your control systems to then think about the utility bills and sort of broader information is oftentimes, as scholars pointed out, oftentimes the energy and sustainability or facility operations teams that are going to utilize this information don't have the visibility at the portfolio level either. It's sort of assumed that you do. And that's actually oftentimes a really big gap. So a great example is, say you do a 10 or 20 site proof of concept phase, and then you immediately want to roll into a larger scale phase. How do you determine which locations to go to in a cost-effective way without actually having collected the portfolio data? And that's just one example of where it can be a bottleneck to not have the information. So we do like to encourage hitting this from both sides. And a good platform to enable a connected buildings program is going to give you the capability to do both of those things, to look at the micro and the macro at the same time. Both of those data sources or data types are going to fit through a formatting and organization and standardization process. This is incredibly important to make sure that you are getting an accurate representation across your facilities. And there's a lot of things out there, a lot of standards and techniques are emerging to enable standardized tagging and point mapping and naming of data points at different hierarchies in your portfolio. But it's, there's not one that's the right way to do it. The important thing here is to collect the important information, tagging and metadata, and to apply a standard convention for naming and tagging. Then you're going to move into a phase where you've got all the information in one place, but as Skylar pointed out earlier, that often causes as much problem as it does solve the problem. So it's one thing to have it all in one place. That is an important first step, but you often then need to do things to layer in analytics over the top of that. And then oftentimes what our team finds is that even when we do fault detection and diagnostics, for example, we then need to layer on even more filtering on top of the results of the analytics. So we're then doing analytics on the analytics. And that's because if you have a large portfolio of 100 or 1,000 more sites, you're going to generate a lot of fault data. I've yet to see one where you don't generate a lot of things that would at least be worth looking at if it was the only thing that was popping up on your screen. But there's too much to look at. So you've got to filter down and prioritize the things that really matter and come up with an approach. And then just sort of to finish off this slide, a good enabling platform for a connected buildings program is going to give you access to all of that information at your fingertips and within multiple different groups within a large organization. So, at Switch, we believe that the right way to do this is with a cloud infrastructure and an appropriate scalable user interface that meets lots of different people's needs. The sort of project plan for any given phase. This slide is a good description of what I call a phase. So you're going to usually start smaller in one of these programs and pick some subset of your portfolio, try it out, and then expand out if you get the results you like. Any given phase is going to last something like between 4 to 12 months or so, typically. And it all starts with developing a strategy and a plan. I don't think that'll be a surprise to anybody. But there are very specific things you want to look out for in your plan, and hopefully you're working when you're doing this with someone that's experienced with the pitfalls, and you can bring all the right people to the table. One thing I always encourage my clients to do, and this is going back to my days in consulting, is to include people at the relevant levels across the organization. And so to sanction something like a steering committee early on is very critical, because while the budget holder, senior vice president, or something like that may not be someone that's involved on a day-to-day basis, that person does care at some point to know that the program, the project is going well. And so it's important to bring them in and periodically communicate and set up the proper governance structure for a program like this. I also encourage people, where possible, to set aside budget for this. This is less of a problem with our retail customers, because they tend to work through corporate real estate groups that have that capability. But with some of our commercial customers, they want to do each building, one building at a time, and that's a very, very difficult way, particularly at the beginning of a program, to get people on board. It's typically better if there is a separate budget for this. You know, people that study innovation for a living, like Clay Christensen at HBS, will always tell you that you've got to split off the thing you're doing that is new and treat it like a separate entity until it's allowed to grow on its own. Next, you're going to move into an integration phase. The integration phase is where a lot of the risk is in a program. It can go fast or it can go slow. Most of the delays in a program are going to come from unexpected things in integration. So working with someone that knows what they're doing is very important, but also having the right people at the table and knowing what the plan is very important. Oftentimes the IT group in this phase is oftentimes for the first time meeting the facilities team or the facility operations sub-team. And when that happens, sometimes you get friction in the process and it's not resourced appropriately. So try to get your IT folks to the table earlier, because they are the ones that oftentimes control the operational technology networks in the buildings. The platform configuration phase is actually the one that oftentimes is the most mysterious to companies going on this journey. But in our experience, with the right software and technology, this actually doesn't take very long. So if you're working with a good company, then they will know how to implement their platform, or will have a proper consultant to do so, a contractor to set up the software, and this actually should go quite quickly. If that middle phase, the configuration phase, gets blown out in time, then something is not right. Once the buildings are all set up and all the data is integrated at the portfolio level, then you will almost always move into some sort of premium service or managed service phase. This is generally because most companies or corporate real estate groups looking to embark on a connected buildings program do not have the resources and capabilities, or just simply the bandwidth with the resources they do have to take over this program. At Switch or working through consultants, there's always some measure of performing a service to either do things like fault detection as a service ongoing, retro commissioning services, even sort of handoff models where we'll help customers set up a NOC, for example, a central network operations center for their building operations. After that, you're sort of in the measurement period, and the important thing there is to keep up the communication with the stakeholders, to document your successes, to learn from speed bumps that you hit along the way, and to plan to roll out larger at scale, or for the next phase, of equal magnitude. So, return on investment is a big deal here, and we understand that. And there are some things with ROI that are highly tangible, and some that are not. And that's a very, very long discussion. And that was actually a question that was asked right before I started my section here. And the reality with ROI is that it depends on the customer. I've seen companies that care more about risk management for their brand than they do about energy savings. We're working with customers that in certain property types care a lot more about occupant comfort than operating cost, if you had to prioritize the two. And then, of course, the majority of companies still are just wanting to identify inefficiencies in cost, primarily energy and maintenance. These four goals, shown as the sort of four corners of this circle, came from a recent engagement we did with a multi-site retail customer, but these are broadly applicable to any multi-site portfolio, really any building type, but particularly for the distributed operations, portfolio operations, and for repair and maintenance with retail companies. So it's reduce energy consumption and costs, reduce or eliminate high priority technician visits, reduce time to repair issues when there are issues identified, and then try to extend equipment life. This is a really good place to start. And there are 7 strategies that were implemented to actually affect these. And as the diagram indicates, I realize it's a little mesmerizing, unnecessarily psychedelic, but there are 7 things that we've done with this particular program to actually achieve these, and most affect multiple goals. All of these are tangible things that can be measured. as well. So it's as simple as verifying and updating schedules and set points. That can either be in the control systems already in place, or in some cases by the connected buildings platform, if it has the capability to do control. For retail, incidentally, I would definitely encourage you to look for a connected buildings platform that does have the capability to do supervisory control. And then other things like working and providing structured data to the design consultants or energy engineers that are working to do upgrades and retrofits. These people usually are not informed. Unfortunately, it's the world I came from, and they're usually operating in a vacuum of information. So they love it when they can just get a CSV file of all the data out of a platform to then have a look at, well, we're spending an awful lot of money, or the company's customers spending an awful lot of money maintaining a hydronic system. Maybe we should just go to a simple split air conditioning system here. They're usually making assumptions about that. It's much better when it can be fed with data. And then, of course, the more advanced stuff that's a little bit more modern, like doing fault detection and analytics, monitoring based commissioning. That's what MBCX is. That is really becoming a significant value driver in all of these categories. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the results from this specific program on the next slide. So these 4 drivers, this is just some of the numbers we've put together recently for this. And I think this is relatively representative of what you would find in most multi-site portfolios. This was a 10-site phase 1 implementation. It's been going on for about 4 months. There's about $70,000 in annual energy cost savings identified. That was largely through scheduling and set point adjustments, also through some targeted maintenance that was identified where units were essentially running but not providing cold air or hot air, as it were. So there's a low delta T consideration that needed to be repaired, and a few other things just related to mechanical equipment. That worked out to about $7,000 per store on average, which was 11% on a portfolio average. So it's fairly significant. Reducing high priority tech visits. This one's interesting. It's a little bit tougher to measure, but because it required a process change on the part of the customer to actually redirect certain work order categories from their work order system. In this case, to Switch's in-house building operations center. This could, of course, be a third-party engineering group. Energy managed services are starting to become a broader offering industry-wide. And then some companies actually, hire a resource specifically to do this. We had another corporate customer recently that hired a controls and energy engineer to sort of oversee this centrally for a smaller portfolio. But over the course of the last 2 months, there have been 3 emergency site visits avoided. That works out roughly, using average numbers, to something like $5,000. We expect as more sites come on that we're going to get about 1 every 5 or 6 days based on the historical portfolio work order data. So this adds up over time. And that's basically sending hot or cold call complaints, or air conditioning failure complaints, HVAC failure complaints, humidity control complaints, things of that nature. Those work order categories, redirecting them for remote triage before a person is sent out to site. So this is another example, like what Skylar talked about, of doing that. It's relatively simple to set up once you're connected to the buildings. Reduced time to repair issues. There were 37 previously unknown repair and maintenance issues across the 10 stores. Actually, that was only across 9 of them, because one of them just recently came on. And then 18 other issues that were resolved remotely, largely related to improperly configured schedules as we found them. But a few other things too. Some control sequence problems that we were able to use the Switch platform to override. So this is very significant stuff. They're going to need to prioritize these, of course, over time. This is something you should plan for and have a strategy for how to handle it. But almost always we find things that are not working properly as expected that were not previously known by the remote maintenance teams. And then extend equipment life. This is the one that really surprised me. But in this particular case, we found a lot of schedules that were, there was in one case where several locations actually, for some reason, were only setting back at night on Sunday and Monday between midnight and 6 a.m. Every other night they could have been and were not. So that all added up across all the HVAC zones and lighting at each location to over 190,000 annual run rate equipment hours that will be avoided by implementing schedules through the supervisory control capabilities of the connected buildings platform. That is really significant stuff. It's not going to be something that goes into a 2-year payback, but over the next 5 to 10 years, you're significantly reducing the equipment life cycle on this. So I want to answer the question that came in, which was, what are the payback limits or requirements you often meet? Is it 2 years or 5 years? Like basically, what are customers asking us to hit? And it varies. For the ones that are looking for the more tangible, quick savings, it is often 2 or 3 years that we're asked to meet. Usually that 10 or 15% energy savings is going to get you that, especially if it's low cost to implement the solutions. That's another reason why it's useful to have control capability in the connected buildings platform. But we do have other customers that care about other things that are a little bit less tangible. You can still measure them, like the number of signs that have, one half burnt out. You want to see that go down over time, but it's not so much a financial number that gets baked into an IRR calculation. It sort of depends. But often in that 2 to 3 year range for the hard cost savings that sort of pay for the other objectives of the program is sort of what we're working in. That's typically fairly simple to do. Fairly straightforward to do once the buildings are connected.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. Just to summarize some of the key points that we went through today, smart connected facilities platforms are really empowering multi-site retailers with 3 core pieces here. It's operational visibility across your facility portfolio. It's real-time command and control, which Aaron mentioned is really key in achieving those quick payback periods. And it's making sure once you've got all your data in one place, that you can prioritize the alerts that it's producing and engage in proactive and predictive maintenance on your store portfolio to achieve those cost reductions. So that wraps up today's webinar. I want to thank the audience for joining us on today's session. We hope the information was valuable to all of you.